Hi, and welcome to Let's Talk, the podcast where we break down storytelling across books, television, and film with a special love for book-to-screen adaptations. Here, we talk about craft, character arcs, structure, dialogue, visual language, and the creative choices that shape how a story lands. If you like thoughtful conversational deep dives into the stories you can't stop thinking about, you're in the right place. Let's talk. This will be my Outlander Season 8, Episode 7 review titled Evidence of Things Not Seen. As always, if you are looking to avoid spoilers from the book or the TV show, please do keep on scrolling. So the episode opens with Jamie walking up a mountain with Frank's voiceover explaining that it's the autumn of 1779 and King's Mountain presented a serene vista that was reminiscent of Culloden Moor. Right away, we as viewers understand that Jamie has read this passage in the book that Frank wrote and is thinking about his words as he ascends this mountain. As Frank makes a connection of King's Mountain and Culloden Moor being a serene vista before Culloden's historic bloodshed, I personally found that to be a stretch because having visited Culloden Moor myself, it is a very, very flat bog, and this is a mountain. Frank goes on to say, as history would record, this tranquility was nearly the calm before the storm of iron and fire. Major Patrick Ferguson and his loyalist militia established their stronghold at the summit, commanding the high ground. Below, the over-mountain troops gathered, their resolve firm as the earth beneath them. Many rebels were picked off as they climbed up the mountainside. The battle was swift and fierce. 290 loyalists, including Ferguson himself, died, and only 28 of the rebels fell. This is when we see Jamie pulling out the book and saying out loud the words, including me. Jamie then stands on top of this mountain overlooking the land below, and we hear this Gaelic song beginning to play. The lyrics say farewell to Loch Abar, which is the name for the region in the western part of the Scottish Highlands. When we get this really beautiful wide-angle shot where we can see just how high up Jamie is actually standing on the top of this mountain, it gives us a visual as to what this battle would have even looked like given the terrain. And it also puts Jamie at this very visually important location standing atop a mountain. In many ways, we know that he is trying to mentally prepare for the fact that he may be slain during this battle, and him going through the motions and walking through everything that Frank is laying out is a way almost for him to practice visualization. It's at that point that we get the title card for the episode, which says Evidence of Things Not Seen, and we can see here that a lace maker is starting to make some black lace, and that's followed by an image of the black lace being rolled out on a bed. This is obviously foreshadowing to events that will happen later on in the episode surrounding Fanny and her grandmother and Jamie and Claire and their time in France. We then jump over to the big house, and Jamie and Claire are talking about Jamie's experience standing at top of King's Mountain, reading Frank's words and seeing the place himself. Jamie admits that this all makes sense to him and that Frank's words appear to have a lot of merit. Then the show does something that has bothered me a few times this season, which is repeat dialogue to make sure that we as viewers don't forget the very specific message that the show wants us to know, which is that Jamie and Claire don't know why Frank wrote the book. 7 episodes in, they still don't know why Frank wrote the book, if it was meant to torment them or warn them. I understand that when you're working with a big ensemble like this and multiple storylines that you have to remind the viewer of small plot points that might have happened seasons ago or years ago in the past or very far in the pasts of these two characters, but they have repeated this sentiment every episode of this season, and to me that feels like very lazy, repetitive writing. We then jump over to Fergus at his print shop in Savannah, and we see him teaching his boys how to print a printed page. And Henri Christian expresses interest and wants to try, but he is afraid of disappointing Fergus because he is different. Fergus has made a stool for him to use, and we see him and Germain roll out the paper and successfully print the page without smudges, and Fergus tells them both that one day the print shop will be theirs, and that the pen is their sword. This again is being used as a narrative callback setup because we know how this episode will end, and it's establishing early on that both the boys have an interest in the practice of printing, but Henri Christian in particular has more of an interest than Germain. This scene also reaffirms to us that Fergus has become very, very fond of Henri Christian, which you'll remember in the previous season, he was initially very much rejecting of him. They have made a point to show us different instances of him and Henri Christian becoming very close with one another, and that their bond is very, very tight. That is when we leave the print shop and we see the finished portrait of Amaranthus and Trevor and find William looking at it in the living room. We can see right away that he is upset. And when Amaranthus approaches, he tells her that he has found Ben and confronts her for knowing that he was not dead, and also informs her that he has risen to the rank of general. Amaranthus owns up to knowing that Ben is alive, but claims that she could not dissuade him from joining the army. And this is when we get to the crux of their argument with one another, because rightfully so, William feels incredibly betrayed by both Ben and Amaranthus. She calls out that the Greys are very stubborn and tells William that it was only after she expressed what exactly the repercussions would be for Trevor to Ben to have a father who was a traitor that he decided to fake his own death. This whole scene takes place in chapter 118 of Go and Tell the Bees That I Am Gone, and almost all of the dialogue is pulled directly from the source material. She admits that she wanted a coward, a man who would avoid conflict and peril. William then asks if she thought that that might be him, and she says that she did at first, because John had mentioned that he had resigned his commission, but she saw the truth of William quickly and knew that he was not like that. You can see right away how much that affects William, that her first inclination of him was that he may have been a coward. This is when she spots the bruise on his cheek, and William tells her that he must tell Lord John and Uncle Hal that Ben is alive. And Amaranthus doesn't want him to do that because she's afraid that they will hang Ben. And that's when William can see that she is still in love with him, despite agreeing to marry William. That's when she starts to backtrack and argue that nothing has changed, they can still get married. And it's at that point that Lord John enters the room and catches them with Amaranthus's arms wrapped around William. In the book, it's made very clear that Lord John has been watching these two very closely and has inferred from that the two of them are growing close to one another. This is just another instance when he catches them in the act that kind of reaffirms his suspicions about them. And he informs the two of them that Hal is en route from London to learn of Ben's death, and that's when William tells John that Ben is actually alive and at the Continental camp. John can see how upset Amaranthus is and apologizes to William for not believing him that Ben might still be alive, and that's when he starts to try and console Amaranthus because he recognizes that she must be incredibly shocked to hear this news. He tells the two of them that he had been dreading telling Hal that his son was dead, but Amaranthus wants to tell him news, and John decides to fetch brandy instead. We know, because we were just privy to the conversation between Amaranthus and William, that she is afraid that if people find out Ben is alive, it will impact their son Trevor, and also her, because she was in on the lie. To her credit, though, she recognizes that William is not going to keep this secret for her. He is upset about discovering that Ben is alive as well, and that also Amaranthus had lied to him, and it puts their impending wedding in jeopardy as well. So it's a bigger mess than simply finding out that Ben is alive now that her and William have entangled themselves with one another. And I think that she is playing the long game here, knowing that she'd rather get ahead of this news than have it come from William. She'd rather it come directly from herself. Back in Savannah, we see Bree and Marcelly walking through town, briefing each other about Fergus being the son of the Comte Saint-Germain, and how Fergus does not want to be a pawn and fears that this is a way to undermine the rebel cause. Bree agrees that John has claimed Percy to be a slippery person, and Marcelly starts to imagine how that wealth would change their lives. And so she asks when Roger and Bree are going to leave, and then is out in the open when Bree divulges all of their plans to meet with the rebels tomorrow to give them gold and get rifles. I did not like this because in no way would Brianna do this out in the open in public, and yet here we are having this scene take place in the middle of this open forum where anyone could hear them talking. And it's at the same time that Marcelly has a tomato thrown at her for being the printer's wife and is warned to tell her frog of a husband to mind what he prints. This, of course, is our first bit of foreshadowing into what the core climax of the episode is and the key conflict surrounding Marcelly and Fergus moving forward. At the cairn, Claire and Fanny are beside the water, and Fanny is holding a locket that says Faith on it that we saw in season 7. And she asks Jane if she minds if she wears it. Fanny's conversations with Jane are used as sort of info dumps in the series, and she expresses in this scene how much she misses Jane, but also it's a way of showing us her trinkets and the things that she has kept close and on her person that belonged to Jane at one point. And that serves as the perfect vehicle to introduce something that serves as connective tissue that's not used in the books. And in this instance, it's the lace that we saw in the title card. Fanny is afraid that she has lost a piece of lace on the journey to Fraser's Ridge, and she reveals to Claire that her grandmother had made it because she was a lace maker in Paris. Claire in the books makes a point to not ask Fanny too many questions because she does not want to reintroduce trauma and pain surrounding the death of her parents and her journey over the ocean, theoretically, to America when she was young. And so she really doesn't poke and pry into Fanny's past, but she was old enough to remember certain things, and in the book she brings them up on her own. Here, one of those things is that her mother lived in Paris when she was a girl. They would visit there sometimes, and her grandmother lived in Paris and made lace. Claire is asking her name, and you can see that she's now trying to connect the dots. So again, this show-only change is being used as a vehicle to further emphasize this Faith storyline and reaffirm another piece of the puzzle that would suggest that not only did Faith live, but lived in Paris, existed in Paris, grew up there, and then would go back with her own daughters. Back in Savannah at Lord John's home, we see Amaranthus owning up to knowing that Ben was alive, and John is rightfully upset. This is when William actually tries to defend her actions, and John starts to point out that becoming a widow has been quite lucrative for her. That's when she snaps. She rightfully asks John if he has ever had to be hungry before, because she has, and she would never allow that to happen to her son if she had any say in it, and wanted to prevent him from having the same fate. And so in her anger, she throws her drink into the fire and walks out of the room, which leaves William and John alone to digest this news. John very quickly admits that he was a little harsh, and then confronts William and says that he knows that William and Amaranthus are close. Because as we, the viewers, just saw, William was angry with her, but then was very quick to defend her. And John is not unaware of that. He sees it happening in real time too. But now that we know that Ben is actually alive and Amaranthus is indeed not a widow, he sees this as something he needs to warn William about, because it is now at this point very improper for him to entangle himself with Amaranthus, given that she still has a husband. This is when William counters that he has no interest in entangling himself with anyone who deceives him. And we get to another key element of the storyline here, which is that both William and John are at an impasse with how to handle the news of Jamie being his father. And it's something that is still a very deep wound in William that he has not yet found a way to heal, and that John cannot heal for him. And that means that every time that John parents him, because he is his parent, William rebels against it and lashes out in anger. And we see that happen multiple times in this episode, this one being the first example of that. We then jump over to see Marcelly cleaning her clothes when Fergus approaches their house and spots a letter in the door. It ends up being another riddle, and it says, "Ladybird, ladybird, fly away home. Your house is on fire and your children are gone." But the word bird is spelled B-U-R-D. Fergus then recites another one, "Who killed Cock Robin? I said the sparrow with my bow and arrow." And so we get very quickly the sense that this is not new for them. They've been receiving these letters for quite some time now. That's when we see Henri Christian again trying to learn how to print, and Fergus imparting more wisdom on him before he runs inside. And the two of them, Fergus and Marcelly, are left smiling at how proud of him they are. This, of course, is meant to, again, establish that really close bond between Fergus and Henri Christian, which I think would have felt more effective if this took place in an episode outside of this one, because all of these scenes with them together seem very strategically placed in order to have big impact in the same episode. But for me, a lot of the times when you're trying to build a narrative impact like this, or something that we can grasp onto and feel really deeply, it has to be established over a long period of time. And the show, given the condensed nature of this final season, isn't doing that. And so it does feel almost like product placement to stick these scenes in where they are, because the conversation that follows is in service of establishing that narrative, and it feels more like info dumps or context-driven dialogue rather than realistic dialogue that would take place between Fergus and Marcelly here. Her saying that she does not want idle threats to scare them away from something that brings her sons so much joy is so specific. It doesn't feel like natural dialogue that the two of them would be exchanging here. But the scene does allow us to see them be flirty with one another, and Fergus references their future children, which Marcelly jokes is him trying to populate the entire colony. We do ultimately get this really beautiful scene of the two of them together in their bedroom, with all the eager kids running around outside the doors and her having to lock it so that they can have a moment alone. And it's such a great parallel to how we saw them in season 3. Their relationship still has that fire and passion even after all of this time, with all of their kids running around upstairs. And it's a really beautifully shot scene between the two of them where we can see that they still have that chemistry. And it's also laced with plenty of humor between the two of them too. And I thought that the way it was shot was just a really beautiful, quick, intimate scene between the two of them that again establishes that the two of them are still so in love even after all of this time and all of the children that they have had together. Back at the big house, Claire tells Jamie about the lace going missing with Fanny and how it was made by Fanny's grandmother, who was a lace maker in Paris. Jamie says he remembers a lace maker across from Master Raymond's apothecary, and while he was walking by, he had heard a child's cry. And the two of them wonder if it's possible that that was Faith. Claire says that she thinks Mother Hildegard chose the name Faith because she wanted Claire to hold on to her faith in a moment when she was so scared to lose Jamie. And the show kind of twists that narrative idea to encapsulate not only the faith of it all, but also this impending worry she has about the Battle of King's Mountain and her questioning how she's able to have faith that everything will go okay when they don't know what the outcome's going to be. Jamie then delivers a line about the unseen threads bind them. They're woven by a hand far greater than our own, and asks Claire to hold on to him. And Claire then says, always. Like almost every scene we've had between Jamie and Claire in season 8, this narratively felt like it was in service of other storylines and didn't feel like a tender, quiet moment between the two of them. It once again is setting up narratively the faith storyline of it all. And to me, it feels like a lot of these moments that we are really desperate to have time with Jamie and Claire ahead of this battle that's been looming is quick and also completely in service of everything but their relationship. Back in Savannah, we see poor John outside drinking when he is approached by a horse and carriage, and inside we see Percy Beauchamp emerge. John very quickly asks, "Why have you come?" And that's when Percy says he has information for him. This is the first time that we're properly reintroducing the Captain Richardson storyline, because it's been a few episodes since that has come up. Percy tells John that Richardson was seen boarding a ship in Charlestown and intends to make his way to Savannah, which is all excellent news. After their business is done, this is when Percy starts to flirt with him again and brings up the day of their parents' wedding and says that he remembers everything. If you have not read the Lord John novellas, I highly recommend that you do, because they're fantastic, but also the storyline between John and Percy is so dense and complicated that it would be very hard for me to encapsulate exactly the nature of their relationship in this video. But John sums it up perfectly by saying that he's tried very hard to forget it all. That's when Percy starts to lore drop a bit with his dialogue, and the music implies John's memory working to recall those moments. And Percy tells him he wanted to go slow, but John was very hungry for him back then. Percy points out that there was a time when John loved him, if only he was honest with himself to admit it, and that's when he kisses him and John kisses him back. Perfectly timed with William's entrance. One of the lines that I really liked in this scene between John and Percy is that John calls him Perseverance. Never was a man so well named. Perseverance means a continued effort to do or achieve something despite difficulties, failures, or oppressions, which is so appropriate for this situation between the two of them. And it's also great foreshadowing for what is going to come in the storyline between Percy and John. It's going to be different in the show than it is in the book, so I think that's important to note here. And again, I would encourage you to go and read the Lord John novellas because they're really fantastic. John, for the first time, is being honest with himself when he chooses to kiss Percy back and admit with his actions that there was, in fact, a time when John had loved Percy. And it's in the exact moment that John allows himself to feel that William walks in and sees them kissing. John obviously tries to play it off like it's nothing, but William is clearly flustered by the entire interaction and chooses to say the most cutting thing that he can think of in this moment, which is that he thought there was nothing worse than having a traitor for a father in Jamie, but now he is seeing what John is, and that is worse in William's opinion. And that's the moment when Percy takes his leave. Keep in mind that for William, this is John who essentially puts bumpers up in his own life in order to prevent William from stepping out of place or talking out of turn, and he carries himself with such honor and nobility. And so for William to find him in this position is really unnerving for him. And for months now, William has been mulling over the information that John was the warden at Ardsmuir Prison where Jamie was kept, and how he could connect the dots between the two of them, and then John being entrusted with William's care after Jamie leaves. It's clear that William wants an answer to that, so he confronts John about it, and John counters by saying that he and Jamie were friends, and they had gone through great lengths to protect William, and tells William to never speak to his own father that way again, and that is when William counters by saying he does not have a father. The acting in this scene in particular, I think, is some of the strongest of this episode. I really love any scene between these two, and I think that there's a really great job done to convey just how deeply William actually loves John, because he would not be affected in this way or this much if that love for John was not there. William lashing out in this way obviously is in large part due to the shock of what he's walked in on and what he's now discovered Lord John to be. But I also think that this scene in particular and the acting surrounding it does a really great job of subtly implying that William's anger stems mostly from how much he loves John and this realization that maybe John didn't raise him out of pure love. There was something deeper going on that once again puts William in this predicament where he doesn't feel like anyone wanted him, truly. You can understand then that if William were to believe that the circumstances surrounding John adopting him and taking him from Jamie were suspicious in any way, it would imply then that William was not wanted by either of the men that he views as father figures. He cannot hear from John in this moment how deeply he is loved and was wanted by him, and that him raising William was out of that love. He's unable to hear those words and feel them because he's so red with anger right now. Back at the big house, we see Claire putting honey in jars when Jamie tells her of a letter that came from Ian, who had stopped at the brothel where Jane and Fanny were raised and had collected information about them, along with some notes that the man took while speaking with Jane before her death. So this is a way to tie us back to a scene that we saw a partial portion of in season 7. It also introduces a flashback narrative where we get to go back into that room where the man was interviewing Jane and fill in some of the gaps from that conversation. And they're using that again to beef up the storyline with Fanny, Jane and Faith. Jane tells him of a strange man coming into their grandmother's business and asking her to look after a baby. And he had said that if he didn't come back to find a Lady Brock Torok, which is Claire. Her grandmother then went to find this lady, was sent to the house of a wine merchant, but was told that the lady had already left the country. And so her grandmother raised her, meaning Faith, and when Faith grew up, Jane and Fanny's mother had learned that the woman lived in the mountains of North Carolina, and all of their family, including Jane and Fanny, were on their way to find her when their ship was taken by pirates and Jane and Fanny's parents were killed. This narratively ties back to the opening scene of the season where Jamie and Claire are talking to that pirate. So it closes the loop on that storyline, but it also is an example of how the showrunners are trying to find weak points, so to speak, in the original source material where they can insert information and find ways to make it work. So the mysterious ways in which Jane and Fanny's parents died on the boat, they can now provide a story to plug that narratively into this greater overarching one that they're building around Faith. And so they're creating this character, which is going to be this woman that ends up with the baby and holds that baby for Master Raymond and raises it as her own, and happened to be a lace maker across from the church. Somehow that woman in France would have been able to give this Faith child any context about where she came from, who her parents were. We have no idea how they were ever going to discover that Lady Brock Turok ended up in North Carolina. I guess the show's not going to give any sort of context to that either, so we're just supposed to believe that that's the case. And Jane told this writer that she wanted Fanny to know she was at peace with dying and that none of this was Fanny's fault, that God owes Jane and will help Fanny to find this woman when she's gone so that she has a chance to be safe and loved. I'm selfishly glad that we got more Jane on screen because I think this actress did a great job with her. But I also think that it's important to remind viewers that this is now a confirmed relative of Claire's, which means it's a confirmed relative of William's. And as much as they're trying to connect Claire and Faith and Fanny and Jane together, it also connects people that shouldn't be connected. So it's, to me, just a very messy approach to this storyline. I've said from the beginning that I can understand why, for the shock value, the show would want to introduce this connection, but I just don't see why it needed to be there. Because when Claire and Jamie realized that Faith was coming to find them when she died, there is no payoff. It just feels like there's no point to it because she's dead. All it does is cause more pain for Claire and Jamie. And once again, we've gone the entire season with them speaking in ways that only further other storylines. We haven't had a single conversation between the two of them that hasn't been in service of another storyline. That's when we go back to Savannah and we see smoke coming through the door and a fire starting at the print shop where Fergus and Marcelly and the children are sleeping. This is a scene that I have dreaded seeing on screen because it broke my heart when I was reading the book, and it plays out so differently in the show in a way that I really still have not been able to wrap my mind around. Fergus tells them all to leave the house quickly, wakes the boys up, but they're not in their beds, and Marcelly says that they must be upstairs on the roof because they always like to go up there. And so Fergus goes up on the roof and finds the boys. And that, to me, as a book reader, is when I started to get nervous, especially when we see that the stairway that he goes through ends up engulfed in flames. Bree and Roger arrive fully dressed when they see the house burning, and Marcelly looks up, and she's covered by a blanket by someone out in the street, and we see Roger go to help with the water. Fergus ties the boys with rope to try and get them down from the roof, tells them to be brave, and lowers them down slowly. And we see Henri Christian refuse to leave his side because he wants to stay with his father. And again, this is another point in which the story is trying to beef up the relationship between these two. Because if you've read the book, then you know that the outcome of this scene ends with Henri Christian's death. And the show does play on that when we see Fergus lowering the boys by the rope on the roof and asks them to be brave, and Henri Christian does in fact fall. This is when we get this shot that was in the trailer of Marcelly screaming. But in the show, we see that Roger ends up catching him, so he does not fall and die. We can see the relief on Marcelly's face, and I for a moment believed that we were in the clear, but then the show had to go and break my heart. As soon as I realized that this scene was not going to play out the same way as it does in the books, and Roger catches Henri Christian, I immediately started to fear for the worst, and unfortunately that was confirmed for me in the scene that follows. The fact that this scene ends with Fergus looking directly into the eyes of his wife and Marcelly seeing him and making eye contact with him before the roof collapses and Fergus falls through and right into the fire, it just felt cruel to me. And the one thing that I would say is a relative bright spot of this change is that Lauren Lyle, who I've long believed to be one of the strongest actors on the show, gives an unbelievable performance in the moments that follow this. She is so underrated. I think she deserves all the flowers in the world. And as an actress, I would have to imagine that digging into this was very satisfactory for her. But as a fan of the show and someone who has read the books, I just could not understand what the goal of this was other than shock factor. And shock factor for us as viewers, sure, but why did we need to put Marcelly through this? Her losing her child in the book sets off a series of events between her and Germain that we are now no longer going to get in the show, which that's its own separate argument. But you have literally ripped this woman's heart out of her chest and are going to end the series with that notion in mind. I just don't understand why she didn't deserve a happier ending. And when Jamie wakes up to the sound of her sobbing and instantly knows something is wrong, and he says something's wrong, and then tries to fall back asleep and can't, again, yeah, you could use this as a way of pointing out that Jamie still has his powers. I don't know how you want to spin it, but it just felt like an empty narrative decision that didn't need to be here. Fergus has long been one of my favorite characters. I think he's one of everyone's favorite characters. And as someone who reads the books and he is still very much alive, I just don't know why he had to be the low-hanging fruit here. Why did any of these characters have to go through with this painful loss? I don't know what it's setting up in the long term. It doesn't feel like it's setting up anything. And similarly to how I feel about the Faith storyline, it felt like they were going for shock factor without weighing the possibility that maybe for once in the end of this show, we just wanted a happy moment. Back at Lord John's, we see Bree and Roger sitting on the couch, and Bree asks Roger if anything were to happen to her, would he stay in this time with the kids or would he leave? And Roger confirms, you just lost your brother, which means for us that Fergus is dead. Roger says he would stay because that's their home. Their whole family is there. They belong there. And when he says the 4 of them belong there, that's when Bree corrects him and says the 5 of us and tells him that they are pregnant. Now, it might just be me, but I feel like the 2 of them slept together days ago. So I don't know how she would know already that she is pregnant. So this, again, feels like a continuity error to me because I don't think they've been in Savannah that long. They just reunited with one another after Roger came back from the Continental camp. In that reunion is when, theoretically, she would have become pregnant. How so soon after would she know that she's already pregnant? When Bree goes into the room where Marcelly and the children are staying, she sees that Marcelly is on the floor looking at the kids in the bed. And again, what a moment for Lauren Lyle to showcase her acting chops. She broke my heart in this scene. Everything about her performance is so nuanced and so raw and so human. And I feel wrong almost saying that I'm glad the show gave her this opportunity to showcase her acting prowess, because I don't think narratively it needed to happen, but I really hope she gets nominated for something for her work in this scene, and even in the episode that follows this, because she really, really nails it. Bree tells her that John can get her another room, but Marsley admits she's afraid to let the children out of her sight ever again. And when Bree joins her on the floor, she tells her to sleep and that she'll watch over her children. And that's when Marsley admits that someone had left them a note. In that poem, or the riddle that we read, it was about a fire. And at the time, Marsley and Fergus laughed about it because they would get them from time to time and they would always choose to make fun of them. And that's when we get one of the most beautiful lines of dialogue in this moment, which is when Marsley says, "After all these years, I dinna ken where I ended and he began, and now there's barely anything left of him, not even a body to hold, just ashes and bones." And Bree tells her that he is in every single one of their children, and she will always have him with her. And that's when Marsley breaks down further. And again, just wonderful, wonderful acting from Lauren Lyle. She's truly phenomenal. I can't wait to see what else she does because I just think she's so unbelievably talented. And the emotions in this scene, I think, are worthy of the loss of Fergus, but I don't feel like the scenes in the aftermath really hammer home just how big of a loss this is. We don't have enough time to breathe with this loss, in my opinion, because of how rushed this episode and this season has been. The two of them, though, I think did a really wonderful job of conveying just that bone deep pain that she's experiencing in this moment. And the two of them are at this impasse because Bree doesn't know how to support her in such an unbelievably raw moment, and Marsley doesn't know how to go on existing at this point. The way it ends with Marsley screaming out and almost silently crying, I can't emphasize this enough. I think this is the one scene of this season so far where it affected me viscerally, and kudos again to Lauren Lyle for that. Back at the big house, we see Fanny reading the letter from Jane, and this is when Jamie and Claire decide to tell her that their home in Scotland is Brockturrock and that they believe that they are her grandparents. They lived in Paris for a bit, and when they were there, they had a child named Faith. They thought she had died when she was born, but now they think that she lived and that she was Fanny and Jane's mother. Again, we get this info dump where we can tell that the writing is trying to fill in all of these gaps that in the book don't exist. And so the dialogue here felt kind of clunky for me. It was very much like an info dump kind of moment. And we are almost in the same position as Fanny, where we're just being like bombarded with all this information and trying to connect these dots and make it all fit properly. And I feel like, as Fanny does in the book, where she ends this scene saying she'd like to go to her room now, I kind of felt the same way. Fanny admitting that she feels Claire staring at her with tears in her eyes and asking her why that is, opened up this opportunity for Claire to say, "Sometimes when I look at you, you're so beautiful, like Faith must have been." It makes Claire think of all the things that she missed and lost, and it hurts a little. I go back again to, what is the point of putting Jamie and Claire through this pain of realizing their daughter lived and they missed out on all that time? We've had that happen already with Jamie and William. We've had that grief happen with them over the loss of Faith. Why are we doing it again? Fanny, playing devil's advocate, asks how would her mother have known the song that Claire sang to her if she was only a baby, and they admit that they don't know. So that tees up the end of the episode when we get that question answered. This is also when we circle back to the lace from the title card, where Claire explains she had something made very special of lace, a veil, and she believes that it was made by Fanny's grandmother. And again, the show goes back to season 2 and finds anything that they can recontextualize. And in this case, it's what Claire was wearing when they were in the churchyard at what they believe to be Faith's grave, and making that the connective tissue between these storylines. Claire says she'd left that veil in Paris, but it makes her happy to think that she had had something of Fanny's grandmother's, because Fanny is a part of her just as much as she is a part of Claire. Then we get this line of dialogue about family being like lace, fragile and delicate, full of holes and gaps, but strong, threads that are hard to tear apart. I feel like the sentiment for that didn't land fully for me. And while Fanny doesn't downright reject this, I think her overwhelm is a mirror to how the viewer feels, because I felt overwhelmed with all this information and trying to figure out if I could buy into what they're selling here. The scene ends with Jamie and Claire holding each other's hands because they realize that Fanny is overwhelmed as well, and Jamie admits perhaps they should have waited. Back at Lord John's house, we see the kids making the bed with Bree, and Marcelly is asleep on the floor, and that's when Henri Christian tries to wake her. He tells her that they have to go back to the print shop and bring news to the people, and Marcelly tries to tell him that he needs to go and join his siblings. They don't need to work today. So again, this is reaffirming once again that Henri Christian wants to take up the mantle and run the print shop. Marcelly is now a widow with all of her many children and has to figure out what she's going to do next with them and where she's going to live. And Bree tells her she will always have a home with them at the Ridge. But it's also when she brings up the offer from Percy Beauchamp again. And Marcelly knows that despite Fergus not wanting it, it's something she has to consider. This storyline and having her entertain this offer is something that, again, is only really happening in the show. And Bree being the one to tell her that despite Fergus not wanting to take this gold, he would have wanted Marcelly and the kids to be taken care of more than whatever argument he was making in favor of the war. And Marcelly wanting to live alone and away from her family as a widow is the only thing that to me makes zero sense in this equation. Yes, she wants to be supported and have money, but she could have that by moving to the Ridge. So I'm really not sure what this angle is with the land and the Percy of it all. It doesn't need to happen in order for Marcelly to relocate with all her children and be supported. Back at the Ridge, Claire goes looking for Fanny and she's not in her bedroom, and we see her at the cairn again. And Jamie and Claire both go to find her there. They apologize to her for telling her too soon about her mother, and they know that she might not believe them without any proof, but Fanny says she does believe them. But for Fanny, the bigger problem is that she loses everything and everyone she loves, her whole family, and now since Claire and Jamie are part of her family, she's worried that they will leave or die or go away too, and she'll be alone. Obviously, with Jamie and Claire being aware of the Battle of King's Mountain and Frank writing that Jamie dies in that, that's a bad omen for them to hear, especially Jamie, who would feel tremendous guilt knowing that he very well might be adding his name to that list of people who Fanny loses. Jamie then says God tells us that faith is the evidence of things not seen and asks her to have faith in them. So again, this is when the title card comes in, evidence of things not seen. We then get another big time jump when we see Claire and Jamie watching Bree, Roger, Marcelly, and the kids return to the Ridge. And this is when we get a voiceover from Claire, which we haven't had in a while. And she says no two people experience physical pain the same way. Perhaps the same is true for emotional pain, but their collective love of Fergus was reflected in the agony of our shared loss. Their grief was alike. The wild look of suffering in Marcelly's eyes was the same she saw in Jamie's, and there in her own. While I loved the dialogue here, I personally felt like the acting, they didn't look sad enough. And I think that when you're talking about a nauseating ache and disbelief that gnaws at you until you're numb, Brianna doesn't look that way here. Claire nor Brianna looks that way here. Marcelly does, but I would have to imagine that Jamie, although he's trying to be brave and strong for her, would fall apart or at least be angry or confused or shocked or anything. I think this again is evidence of why you can't rush a storyline like this that's meant to have a big impact, because what little we've seen of Fergus in this entire season, none of what he was saying or doing felt exclusive to him as a character. All of his lines of dialogue were again to push the plot forward or beef up another storyline, and none of it felt really like we were living with that character as a person. And so when we lose him, the thing that holds weight is all of the moments we spent with him in earlier seasons, none of the moments we spent with him in this season, which perhaps leads to why I find the acting here to be slightly wooden. And also the framing of it, because you can literally see in this scene when Jamie is standing with Marcelly and trying to console her, that Claire, Roger, Bree, and the kids, they're out of frame behind Jamie and they all shuffle over to the left to get in frame. So again, it just feels like it was so rushed together and none of it felt sincere. In the next scene, Jamie is making a coffin, and again, there was lots of contemplation when the trailer came out as to whether or not this was Henri Christian's coffin. Now we find out that it's Fergus's. And this is the moment when he finally releases his emotions, and we start to get flashbacks of him meeting Fergus for the first time. And this reaction when he is so upset that he has to pause and collect himself, that's what I wanted in that moment with him and Marcelly. As we start to get these flashbacks of Fergus over the course of the story, it just reminded me how much I loved young Fergus. He was so sweet and so funny. There was just zero reason or need for him to be killed off. All of these moments when he just added so much to the dynamic between Jamie and Claire. He was the child that neither of them were able to raise because they lost Faith and Jamie had to leave William. He gave the two of them so much purpose. He made them a family. He made them parents. He loved Claire like a mother. He looked up to Jamie like a father. Through them, he met the love of his life in Marcelly, and he was supported by them wholeheartedly as he began to raise his own family and become a father himself. He had gone through so many emotional struggles in season 7 that the two of them supported him through. He built a life with someone who he loved all the way up until the very end of his life. And so, yeah, I think that you have this moment where you can mourn this character. And again, the show is ending, and so the storyline ends for this character. But it just failed for me because it was so not needed. Sam's acting in this moment when he's reflecting on all these memories of Fergus, I think is far more impactful than the one before when Marcelly and the kids show up in the front of the big house. And in this scene, Fanny approaches Jamie and tells him to come with her. They have made Fanny, who I actually like as a character a lot, and I love the actress too, they've made her almost like this savior character in some ways, where she has come in and is tasked with kind of curing all of the hurt and heartbreak in this family. As though she doesn't have her own to deal with, she is now acting wise beyond her years and coming to the aid of Jamie in this particular scene to try and heal something within him. And so when she brings Jamie to this cairn that she has made and started for Fergus, it's again a full circle moment for when Jamie had started one for Jane. And she says to Jamie that even though Fergus is not with them anymore, perhaps Jamie can find him there. That's the moment when she decides to call him Granda. Jamie looks at her and is clearly impressed with how mature she is, how insightful she is, how thoughtful she is. She pulls out a rock for him and adds it to the pile. And we do get this moment where you can see that Jamie is realizing that she's really accepted the fact that they're family and that they're related and is okay with that. So when he takes this rock from her hand, it's almost more of a transference of acceptance here. We watch Jamie add that rock and smile and thinking of Fergus. He thanks Fanny, and we see in his facial expression the pain dissolve into a sort of acceptance where his face softens and he's able to smile a little bit thinking about him. And that's when he thanks Fanny and she takes Jamie's hand. And so again, they're pushing this faith storyline so hard that it almost makes me resent Fanny because she's being inserted into these scenes that should be sacred moments between the original core characters, which is too bad because I actually love Fanny as a character. And I don't think that it's good writing if you end up resenting the presence of a character in a scene that she should theoretically be entitled to be in, but it feels forced upon me, which is reinforced by this entire flashback of when Master Raymond left Faith with the woman in Paris in 1744, where he says it's a matter of urgency, he must leave the city for a short time, and she's the only person he trusted. This random woman who makes lace that happened to be across the street. I just don't have any part of me that buys into that narrative. Yes, Jamie was in prison and Claire was very sick, but it's not like he couldn't have waited for Claire to be less sick and leave this baby with Mother Hildegard. So we get to see this Faith child very much alive and the woman who ended up ultimately raising her, and Master Raymond saying her name is Faith. And then we find out that the reason that Faith knew this song is because Claire sang it to her, and Master Raymond teaches it to this woman.